now requires the posting of our state motto, "In God We Trust," in every classroom in the state. Tennessee is plagiarizing this horrendous idea. We'll talk about that and a lot more right now on the Tan Talk Radio Network. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. It's the voice of atheism in Florida. Our website is talk.aof.ngo, and you can insult an atheist for $2 right here on the Atheist Forum. We're starting out these days by asking about how first gold digger Melania Trump is doing with her campaign to end cyberbullying in the country. And Joe, do you have any information on that for us?
Well, as a matter of fact, Ed, I do. We opened up last week's show with an item talking about the hypocrisy involved in Melania Trump's so-called anti-bullying campaign, considering that she is married to arguably one of the greatest bulliers in the world today. And the fact that her action had been next to nothing so far as we know to actually effect any sort of anti-bullying campaign or promotions or anything of that nature. Well, immediately that we did that, the following day, which would be last Monday, I saw a number of headlines, both in the local newspapers and on the internet, stating that Melania Trump had publicly come out in public, actually, and stated that she was aware that indeed there was a great deal of hypocrisy in having an anti-bullying campaign, while her husband was basically a full-time or maybe a time and a half a bullying artist himself, and that basically she had in fact done little or nothing to stop or to curb bullying at any level, schools or anywhere else, but she was going to start right away. Now, I'm not the sort of person to take credit for that, but I think the term that we're looking for is the Atheist Forum bump, and that is that when we make a suggestion, Melania is not much for tweeting, but I'm sure she must be listening to our show. It has to be more interesting than anything else going on in her immediate environment. And we thank you, Melania, for answering us and for responding to our observations having to do with your anti-bullying campaign. And we wish you well with your renewed efforts in that direction.
Hey, go ahead, take some credit, Joe. You can take credit.
Well,
actually, Joe, I have a news flash for you. Actually, Melania Trump has just announced that she will abandon her campaign to address cyberbullying in America. She is instead initiating her new campaign to focus on the elimination of marital infidelity in the United States. She's actually seeking individuals who have experience in this area to assist her staff in developing an effective program to implement nationwide. So she's moving right along. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is developing his trade war with China by expanding his tariffs on Chinese products. One permanent exemption: Chinese-made neckties. Okay, fine.
Now, in regard to that same thing, I was reading in the paper today that the tariff on newsprint has increased substantially, which will raise the price of our papers and cause the number of subscriptions to decline, the cost to go up, and all kinds of things. What it means ultimately is that there will be fewer means of mass communications for people to learn what's really going on in our society. So this is a big problem. Actually, it's not just about the cost of paper.
Yeah, particularly when some of the greatest print institutions in this country are being bought and sold for pennies, literally giving them away just to try to keep them alive. And guys like Bezos buying Washington Post sort of with the same sort of consideration I might take to buy a pair of socks.
And there are people who think that they can rely upon such institutions as Facebook for their news opinion. We've seen where that goes.
You think that this has a lot to do with Trump trying to crush the New York Times? He constantly refers to it as the failing New York Times, in spite of the fact that since his inauguration, their circulation has actually increased. And so he's figuring, well, if I can't will them out of business, I'll try to crush them by increasing the cost of newsprint. There was really actually only one American company that produces newsprint that complained about Canadians dumping newsprint, and that was enough to trigger this tariff, which I think is geared toward trying to silence the media, because he cannot stand a free press in this country.
And it's also important to remember that in the all-important campaign of 2016 that has a central role in his thinking, only 2 newspapers throughout the entire country endorsed his candidacy.
Wow.
Which is pretty extraordinary, and would probably explain a certain disaffinity for newspapers.
Do you remember which newspapers they were?
Probably that one that Jared Kushner bought, the New York Observer.
Yes.
I'm guessing that would have been one of them. And I don't know.
There was
West
one
Virginia
in Ohio or Indiana somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you found the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Ed Golly with you and Joe Reinhardt, Jim Peterson, and Judy Adkins will probably jump into the equation here before the night's over. You're welcome to contact us by telephone if you'd like to be part of the program at 441-3000. But in all likelihood, you're watching 60 Minutes right now, which is actually, I think, predicted to have a higher audience than the Super Bowl tonight. So you're probably just driving around if you're listening to us at all, or listening to us as a rerun.
Well, some pretty important pronouncements are about to be made. Revelations like you've never thought of before.
Well, the state of Florida passed a bill, or incorporated into law, this the posting of the state motto in all the schools in the state of Florida. So it needs to be posted someplace conspicuously, not in every classroom, but in every schoolroom. Well, the idea was plagiarized by the state of Tennessee. The lawmakers there have passed a bill to require public schools to prominently display the national motto, which is "In God We Trust," formerly and originally
E pluribus unum.
That was never officially the national motto. It was a de facto motto.
Right.
But it was not until 1956 that the national government implemented the "In God We Trust" as an official motto.
Nevertheless, it did appear on almost all of our currency and a good many other official documents, and represented on the Great Seal and so on and so forth. So it may not have been identified as a national motto, but in effect it really was.
It was de facto the national motto. Everybody used it. That's what our founding fathers wanted as the national motto. But no, we have to have God.
And, of course, that all came about in the 50s during the height of the Cold War and the Eisenhower administration.
Yeah, 54.
Who wanted to delineate the difference between our capitalist system and the communist system by saying, well, we're the good guys because God looks down with favor with us. Anyway, the measure requires schools to display the motto in a prominent location, either as a plaque, artwork, or in some other form. Whether this motto represents an unconstitutional government endorsement of religion is a question that has invited legal challenges in other states with similar laws. But the bill's sponsor says the bill shouldn't bother, quote, faithless people, unquote, and people of other faiths because it's the motto of the country. And here's what she said. Her name is Susan Lynn, representative in Tennessee. She says, quote, "Our national motto and founding documents are the cornerstone of freedom and we should teach our children about these things, unquote, which is kind of remarkable, Judy, because
yes, we should.
Because
teach about these things.
Yes, we should.
Yes.
But we should teach the facts.
Exactly.
And not the made-up stuff that they want to promote.
Right. And if there's any institution that represses freedom, I can think of none better than religion, including Christianity.
The key, really, that gives the whole game away is when she says that it shouldn't bother people of other faiths.
Right.
Does it not occur to this woman that other faiths, those people have gods as well?
Yes.
And that by asserting that, I saw a bumper sticker there that said, "My God rules." Of course, the implication there, or the inference, which either way you want to look at it, is that your God must not be up to par. And that's basically what she's saying. Even if they put up a plaque that says, "In God we trust," and you thought it meant Allah, she says, "Oh, no, it only means my God." And in her case, I'm assuming it's Jesus or Yahweh or Jehovah or the Christian God in any case. But that's how narrow-minded she is. She can't conceive that of the 10,000 other religions, they might have one or two different gods.
I'm sure that even God would be surprised to learn that he was a Presbyterian, for instance.
Right.
Along with the Presbyterians, would be equally surprised.
Of course, same thing's going on in our state, here in Florida. And, Judy, we have decided to try to assist the situation, ironically, being the Atheists of
Yes.
Florida.
We have offered, or we are going to offer tomorrow morning to all the schools in the state, all the public schools in the state, to print signs and send them to them. And right now we have two choices, and we can adjust that as we need to, if we need to. One is a postcard which says "In God We Trust." The background is a flag, and it has the establishment clause going around the flag, and it says "E pluribus unum" on it, so that we want to educate the students as to other things besides just trusting God, because obviously that hasn't worked out real well for anybody. Then the other one is a poster that we're designing, which has various gods on it, so that people can feel included if they don't believe in Jesus or the Abrahamic God, but they are Indian and they are Hindi, or there's a bunch of other gods, as you all know. So we're putting that together to provide the poster with all these different gods on it, as well as the Church of Satan, Scientology, various religions. And we're running a survey to want to know what God you trust. So if you go to the number 2 think.org, you can take our survey. It's only 2 questions. It's going to ask you which God you trust, if any, and if you're a Florida resident. You don't have to be a Florida resident to take the survey. We just want that information for our own purposes, to know how many people in Florida have taken the survey. So please go to free2think.org and check out our survey, and then we'll keep you informed of how many schools take us up on our offer. Since they didn't fund this mandate, we are going to step in and assist the schools as best we can with this project. We've also been in touch with a group so far in Tennessee to talk to them about doing the same thing in their state, and they want to keep up with what's going on here and how well it's been received.
And what was the establishment clause that surrounds the postcard?
Congress shall make no law regarding respecting the establishment of a religion, or the free exercise therefore.
Prohibiting the free exercise
yes, thank
of it.
you.
Yes. Which makes it very clear, in no uncertain terms, that the founding fathers did not want this country to be a theocracy.
Exactly.
I'm of the mind that the woman in Tennessee, what's her name?
Lynn,
whatever it is, I just picture her becoming apoplectic at the idea that we should put up in the public schools a sign professing to trust in any God other than her God. We certainly wouldn't want to persecute her and pick on her like that, but I'd like to see the look on her face when someone reads her the suggestion, if not the ultimatum, that they have to accept a poster with other gods. And I cite the case of, is it Grace versus New York?
The city of Greece, yeah, or township, I think it was
township,
in Greece.
Which dealt with invocations, which was, sure, you can have an invocation before the council meeting or the city hall or what have you, but if you're going to have one person praying, you got to allow people of all descriptions to pray.
Right.
And I myself have delivered invocations on behalf of atheists. I'm proud and
so
happy
has
to do
Jim.
that. And if that applies,
And so has Tracy.
if that applies to invocations, and it applies to Christmas decorations.
Display.
Yes.
You want to put a manger display on in front of the city hall? Fine, as long as they put a Festivus tree and a atheist tree and other points of view, you can do that as well. So the same thing ought to apply here, because it sounds to be cut from the same cloth, and that is, you want to put in God we trust, then it has to be open to all comers. And since at this very moment there are more gods than there are humans, we're going to need a pretty good-sized plaque.
Sure.
And I will say, too, that South Carolina is also pushing this bill, or a bill, I should say, in their state to require this. And my guess is if the motto were anything other than "In God We Trust," we would not be seeing this happening.
And of course, the underlying question is, and the irony of the whole situation is, that nobody can tell me or anybody in this studio tonight how we trust in a God. What the heck does that mean? How do we trust in a God?
All others pay cash.
That's
I've heard that
right.
one before.
Yeah,
No, we don't trust
that's
in
an
gods.
oldie but a goldie. You know,
Right.
and sadly, it has to. This truth has been driven home lately by the gun violence. We see all these tweets from the kids from Parkland and where else and elsewhere, to the effect that, why don't you take your prayers and thoughts and put them where the sun don't shine, and really graphic language, and rightfully so. So we see tens of thousands of millennials, of children, of youngsters of all descriptions coming to the conclusion that prayer is a total waste of time, and therefore the religion that's connected to it might not be everything it's hopped up to be also. So it's sad but true that the tragedy is working in our favor when it comes to dispelling this "in God we trust" crap from the public mind.
People have noticed how ineffective the proposition that if enough people pray, that somehow the injury that has been sustained by so many of us through all these, well, shootings, but also wars and famine and all the other catastrophes borne by human beings everywhere since before any of us could remember, will somehow be rectified if we trust in that other great thing, which is God's love. What does that mean? It's not a guarantee of anything. It's not something like our Constitution, to which we can have some substantive referral when we complain about a denial of our rights, when we complain about our government and its lack of effectiveness and its indifference in the face of human suffering. As per what's going on presently, there's all kinds of dangers out there, and I don't think that God's going to help us with that. We have to help ourselves, and this was the thought behind the founders' creation of the whole secular nature of our government, was that we have to help ourselves.
And after all, Rubio was tweeted saying this is after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, he talked about how this is the kind of thing you pray never happens. Well, obviously it did happen. So either he didn't pray, or he didn't pray hard enough, or he didn't pray to the right God.
Or maybe he doesn't have enough faith. So it's, I think, based on my understanding of theology, that the fault for this latest mass shooting lies directly at the feet of Marco Rubio. His lack of faith and his inability to pray correctly clearly are the reason that people are still going around shooting people. Mm-hmm. How else could you explain it?
Well, that's got to be it, of course.
Yeah. String him up.
Well, no, wait a minute now.
Anybody got any string?
One of the quotes in this article about the South Carolina bill is a mother, one of the kids in school, saying, "I can see how it would offend other people non-Christian." So everybody knows this is about Christianity.
Of course.
And not any other religion or a generic God that just is and is not focused on Christianity.
Globally, anybody who's not Christian is, 2 out of 3 people?
About that.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah.
Right.
So basically, when you put up an "In God We Trust" sign, and it only means their God, Jesus or whomever, they've already offended 2/3 of the world, or at least excluded, if not offended, 2/3 of the world. And why should they care? Well, back at you. If we put up a sign that says, "In Allah we trust," why should you care? if it's not all that big a deal.
But isn't that the whole point of implying that we're one nation under God? It gives us superiority by default that way, by saying that, as Ronald Reagan said, that I firmly believe that God put this nation between these great oceans to be this shining city on the hill,
Right.
and that God looks down most favorably at us, so that we now have a place of superiority among the rest of the world that no God in his right mind would ever establish, of course, but it's a way of saying that we have the right to all the resources of the world at the lowest prices. We have the right to trample on anybody else in the world, to nuke people, to invade people, because we're special in the eyes of this God. We're the most favored child.
Because we have such a high degree of humility.
And then that, of course, that's what this is trying to reinforce. Right. We're somehow special among other people of the world because this God looks down on us with some kind of most favored status.
And this is exactly the claim that all religions make. They and they alone
That's right.
are the ones in communication with God or the deity or whatever, and they therefore have the obligation and the right to tell the rest of us how to conduct our lives. And of course, if they happen to live in a certain place, then that place is divinely blessed, and that means we have special powers and grants and all kinds of wonderful things.
And as long as things are going well, they'll take all the credit for this lucky happenstance. But the minute things start to go bad, then we know whose fault it is. It's the homosexuals and the atheists and the National Organization of Women and gays and all the lists that Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson came up with after 9/11.
Right. People who are different.
Yeah, anybody who doesn't look, think, or act like they do.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. We now, let's see. Another interesting thing that's going on in the world today is happening at the Vatican, where they have produced a document from a week-long Vatican-initiated conference that involved several thousand young people around the world who gave their opinion to the older men who run the church, a piece of their collective mind about how they think the church should be modernized. We're going to talk about that next here on the Atheist Forum. We're going to take a short break to tell you a little bit about Atheists of Florida, and then we'll continue here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Here's our quote of the day from Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe, your avuncular friend.
Yeah, get out of the water tank.
All right. Our quote today is from Jim Wright at stonekettle.com. I have to admit I'm not familiar with Jim Wright, but I think he's right on the money here. He says, "We are a country where preachers are millionaires, where religion has its own TV shows and theme parks. And we don't just have churches in America. We have giant mega churches, temples of glory made from gold and crystal and $1,000 bills. We live in a country where religion rakes in tax-free billions of dollars, buys itself the courts and the elections, and looks out of our TVs every week complaining about persecution." Persecution.
Yeah, that's really more than a quote. That's
Stop picking on me.
But it's so true, isn't it? Yeah, the war on Christianity, the war on Christmas, the war on saying Merry Christmas, all these are fake news items. These are fabricated to create the illusion that we need to put religion in the forefront of our country and define our country as a Christian theocracy.
And you can't sell books and you can't raise money without a cause. You've got to wave that bloody shirt.
You're listening to the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm Ed Golly. I'm joined by Joe Reinhardt, Jim Peterson, Judy Adkins in studio. We're talking about state-church separation because that's what we care about, because we know that if the country ever becomes a theocracy, things are going to get particularly ugly. And it's not the intent of the Founding Fathers to have created such a country, because they knew what happened in Europe when all those nations were theocracies. And their cultures were dominated by religion for 1,000 years. It's a time we appropriately call the Dark Ages. Well, young Catholics told the Vatican yesterday they want a more transparent and authentic church where women play a greater leadership role and where obeying unreachable moral standards is not the price of admission. Of course, that's always been the case, right, Joe? I mean, I think you've said it best. Religion defines the disease and then invents the cure and sells it to you, but it never works.
And then they expect you to be grateful for having been poisoned in the first place.
And it's one of the primary criticisms that we have of religion. Not that it's unprovable, but that it seeks to compel people to feel that they are personally inadequate, that they're bad, they're horrible, just by virtue of existing, by being natural humans. And it's a way that religion has dominated people for thousands of years.
Hey, if you don't believe in God, what do you care? Why do you go around trying to make them take crosses off the side of the road or get those Ten Commandments away from the front of the city hall? What difference does it make to you? Since you don't believe in God, why don't you just keep quiet and stop causing trouble?
Well, over 15,000 young people use the internet to give these bishops that are running the Vatican their opinion about how the Catholic Church should be, I guess you'd say, renovated, revised, updated, modernized, so that they will be more inclined to stay in it, because they warn that excessive moralism is driving the faithful away, and that out-of-touch church bureaucrats need to accompany their flock with humility and transparency. And of course that's getting to be a big problem for all religions in this country, because 24% of Americans this year now proclaim that they have no religious affiliation. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they're atheists, but it means they're not going to churches, they're not tithing to them, and of course we think of churches and religion as being a business. So they're modifying their business plan to keep their flock there and keep that money rolling in.
What any business does in a nutshell, which is they find out what the customer wants and they give it to them.
It's interesting, though, that the churches are, as you averred earlier, are not full. And there's a reason for that.
Yes.
And the reason is that we're living in an ever-changing society. We always have, of course. Every religion is a protest against the previous religion. This is why we're always making transitions, why there was a Protestant Reformation, and why there are literally thousands of different Christian denominations and churches everywhere. And the Catholic Church feels this as much as anybody. Probably the last religion to really feel it seems to be the Islamic faith. But even there are numerous cracks across the spectrum.
Letting
where
women start to drive in Saudi Arabia. What's
That's
that
right.
all about? You got boy, are they going to regret that?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying.
No, that's the first sign of the end of the world.
yeah,
right there.
yeah, it's coming. But it
are
is
they
coming, and it's
thinking?
driving a Cadillac too, I believe. But
What are they
but
thinking?
but at any rate,
Next, they'll be letting them vote. You got to be joking me. All right, go ahead, Jim.
but you can't really dispense with the dynamic character of human beings and their society. You know, we live in an accelerated period of transformation. Ordinarily, across human history, in the Dark Ages or the Enlightenment or any period previous to our own, there was not mass communications. It took a long time for word of change to reach other parts of the world. So in our time, of course, such things are instantaneous with the communication system we have, with the internet and everything else we have going for us. The protests heard in one area become transformed into policy changes in another area. And the church is not exempt from this, and the Catholic Church recognizes that it no longer has the right fit. Young people in particular are cognizant of the fact that we live in a society that is changing. It's more accepting of different kinds of lifestyles, more accepting of expressions of sexuality in particular seems to be the thing that preoccupies a lot of minds.
Right, and you know that's consistent with what these younger people were saying. They made it clear that they love their technology, and the church needs to get hip to that or lose relevance. So at the same time, this document they've prepared said that young people are looking for guidance as to how to responsibly use technology and combat online addiction, pornography, and cyberbullying. They call for the Vatican to issue a teaching document about technology and use it better to spread the faith. Well, of course, they're probably the institution among the world the most, I would guess, the most averse to modern technology and bringing up the rear when it comes to embracing it.
Yeah, the question...
and I think hold that thought, but I think, wouldn't you agree that that's because their attitude is that this Bible wrote all the rules for living, and the rules were set in stone 1,500 years ago, and they are never to be changed or altered or amended in any way. They got it right the first time, and you live with that indefinitely. So as society starts to change and understands that homosexuality is not a crime that should be a capital crime, that the church doesn't come up to speed, so to speak, on that and understand the science behind that and accommodate the modern world as it changes. So as the younger people don't have a hostility toward that anymore, then while the church is telling them to, because that's the way it's always been, then they're starting to lose their adherence, and they've got to make some kind of a change to keep them in the flock.
And additionally, for the Catholic Church, although of course their religion is based in the Bible, they're very much believers in, we will interpret the Bible for you. So not only do you have this Bible that we have to adhere to, but we will explain what's in the Bible. We'll tell you what you need to pay attention to. So they really have tried to be very much of a control on exactly what people believe. Not just what's in the book, but what we want you to believe about what's in the book.
And yet now here they are asking the flock to tell them, what do we need to do to keep you, involved? Of course, that's because for so many years nobody could read except except the
priestly class.
The upper class, and which included the churchmen, the bishops, and so that's why they made all the stained glass windows, right? The world's first comic book. It told them the story because they couldn't read it for themselves. It reminded them the story of the life of Christ and the apostles and all that sort of thing. So nobody had any foundation to challenge anything they were told because they couldn't read anything.
Well, once they were able to translate the Bible into English, the Catholic Church made it a capital offense to own or to read the Bible unless you were a cleric yourself.
Wow.
Duly authorized.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas today, the Baptists, one of their foundations is that every member should read the Bible and interpret it for himself, which, of course, is why we have so many different Baptists.
Bibles everywhere. But actually, that's not a bad idea, because the greatest number of atheists came from people who really read the Bible. And so we got a lot out of that. Now, the church has a big problem, though, in trying to reconcile the worldview of primitive Bronze Age people and their understanding about the nature of the world, and reconcile that with current modern scientific understanding and technology. How do you...
Big advantages is the fact that in the world we live in today, so few people have the attention span to read something as long and complex as the Bible. I mean, we have a president who literally can't read his press briefings, and he was preceded by the previous Republican president the same thing. Somebody had to read it, walk in the room, tell him what it all said, because they had no attention span, which is why he thinks he knows everything. Whatever he's seen on TV is the collective knowledge of the universe, and he knows it all now. And if something new comes along, he says, wow, viola, a discovery. No, we all knew that, you dope. You just didn't never read anything.
Knowing nothing, knowing everything, it's all the same thing.
Well, something that gives me great optimism, you were talking a few minutes ago about 24% of the population here in this country has no religious affiliation.
Yes.
What gives me great optimism is if you look at people under 30 or millennials, that number is actually much, much higher. Of people that are unaffiliated.
Oh, yes, you're right. Very good point.
There's another point, and that is that the millennials in this case seem to be advising the church that they need to take a more modern attitude on, say, dealing with gays and same-sex marriage and things of that ilk. Whereas there are other religions that aren't hung up about gays and same-sex marriage. They're hung up about whether or not to stone your sister to death because she was raped. And these are a group of clerics that would probably do well to listen to some of their younger members as well, because I know that among the liberals, among the reformers, they are furiously looking for ways to interpret their holy books in such a way that it doesn't so clearly endorse genocide or other things of that nature in order to further their ideas.
Their honor killings, yes.
Well, actually, it has to be said, though, that it is a worthwhile enterprise, because it is virtually a confession of the fact that the ancient explanations no longer suffice. We have to have something that's consistent with the modern world in order to function. Elsewise, religions will shrink away into nothing, which is probably where they should be. And I speak as an atheist when I say that. But you know, as long as religions feel that they have to be relevant, okay. So they're changing the nature of their religion, and each time they make a change, they get closer and closer to where we are. They have to accommodate so much that eventually they'll be us.
It just seems
a long time away, but they're working on it.
It just seems the reverse of what they say they can do when they have to ask us how they should think and conduct their religion, when they ought to be asking the Almighty how to run things.
Yeah, so that's the way it's always been. But yes, consistent with what you're saying, Tracy, this document noted that young people are leaving the church in droves, in part because they've experienced indifference, judgment, and rejection by the Catholic Church, because it has not been modernizing. And now I think they're realizing they've got to do that if they're going to keep this this large flock they have is now 1.2 billion people, and it's probably, they see the next generation rejecting it. It's going to take a drastic drop.
Well, the next obvious step is to hire themselves a PR
firm
group and get some focus groups going.
Well, I think you'll find in general that churches in this country do not have the attendance that they have once experienced. They just don't get the butts in the seats, as they say.
Right.
And I think I've seen numbers as high as 30% or more of millennials just have no religious affiliation. That's a very large number.
Yeah, I think it is about a third. And of course, that's relatively low among the other industrialized nations. So when we look at Europe, we see that those numbers are consistent with the older generation, and the younger generation, I would speculate, is probably well above 50%.
And there's a certain kind of connectedness here in the fact that many of the people who participated in this Catholic conference were young people from countries where the Catholic religion was the dominant religion. In other words,
really, wow.
in some cases, the state religion. This is the thing that Americans should be concerned about, and the reason why we want to keep church and state separate. Because we don't want to be in a position where we have to petition the Pope for a change in our society, in how we live and how we think. We want the freedom to be able to do that ourselves, and if we don't like our religion, we can change to another religion or none at all. This is not an option that is available to people in certain other countries. And it well illustrates how much better it is to have a secular country where all kinds of thinking is permitted.
That is the whole basis of freedom in this country. That's what freedom means. The freedom to think what one wants to think, the freedom to say what one wants, and to believe in what one wants.
So why are these legislators trying to influence our thinking by putting the mottos in? It's because what Joe always says, if they can't convince us with their Bibles and their myths and their fables, they want the government to impose it on us. That's how desperate the situation's getting for them. They want us to believe from the day we first walk into first grade that you aren't the best American citizen if you don't subscribe to these religions. And I think it presents a dilemma for the church, because if they accommodate the 21st century, they would need to acknowledge that the commandments of their God are not true for all time and are thus fallible. But if they remain steadfast in their commitment to the rules of their religion, they'll lose significant membership in the near future and potentially be put out of business.
However, I will bring up that a recent study has shown that churches that are growing are the conservative evangelical churches. They are not declining like their liberal counterparts. And I think part of that, from what I've read, is simply that they again give simple answers. This is how it is. This is what you do.
Everything's black and white.
Everything's
right
black
wrong.
and white,
There's
and
no in between.
that's
Yep.
and whereas liberal religions tend to have more nuance and thought behind them.
I'll give you the perfect analogy for that, and that's Las Vegas. The simpler the game, the more popular it is. Push a button, requires no thought at all. You don't even have to put a coin in the slot anymore. It does it automatically. People stand in line to do that, whereas in the 1940s, there were more craps tables in Las Vegas than there are now. Why? Because you have to think. You have to know something to be able to shoot craps. You have to know a little bit about the odds and the possibilities, whereas in order to play a slot machine, you may have to know how to sit down.
But in no case should you ever pay any attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right, that's
Important to
correct.
remember.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's part of what's behind Trump's presidency, and the same with his Republican predecessor, W. They offered simple answers without complex details about how these ideas were to be implemented, right? We're just going to build a wall, and we don't even need to pay for it. Well, I'll vote for that, right?
Yeah.
That's easy if he can do it. But once in office, it can't be done. Mexico says, we're not going to pay for that wall. Are you out of your mind? And, you know, we're just going to put tariffs on everything, and all the Americans will go back to work and have high-paying jobs. Well, what's going to happen to what the cost of living changes when that happens, right? and so they don't have the depth, the intellectual depth to really recognize the complexity of these issues and just say, well, here's an easy answer and I'll give it to you and I'll make it happen, and they get voted in. Then of course they can't do it.
those are just
led this
details.
country into a depression and a war that we're still in, just mucked up everything because he had no idea what he was doing. The world's far too complicated for a guy like that to understand. The same thing with Trump.
I want to circle back to Stormy Daniels for just a moment.
Rock and roll.
Because her attorney recently was talking on MSNBC, and he referred to Trump's lawyers. He himself feels that he's playing chess while Trump's lawyers are playing tic-tac-toe and playing it badly. Falling into every trap. And that's exactly what that reminds me of when you talk about, how Trump thinks about the world and how to institute his thoughts, be they as they may.
Well, of course, I think in the real world, he never anticipated being elected and didn't have that as an objective. He wanted publicity so he could start his private news network, so he could make the most outlandish statements because he'd never be called to the carpet to deliver. And then, can you believe it? I'm in the White House. How'd that happen? Now I've got to answer to all this stuff, right? And so that really, I think, led him to make virtually preposterous statements because he thought, I'm never going to need to answer to this stuff down the road. I'm not going to get elected, but I'm going to promote the Trump brand and get the publicity that I want for my future endeavors. And that's all it was. It was a publicity stunt that backfired, and he ended up in the White House. Now he doesn't know how to deliver. Okay, we've got about, 7 or 8 minutes left. Judy, you've been researching the whole program. We've come up with anything worthwhile to share with our audience at this particular point. Okay, fine.
I want to make one point about how we can tell when it really comes down to crunch time. And if you look at the panics and the mass delusions that have swept across humanity over the ages, they all tend to end the same way. And that is, as Ed alluded earlier, when they can't carry out the scam or the delusion any longer, they try to make the state do it for them. In the South Sea bubble, where royalty stood in line in the snow in order to buy shares in this company, and when it started to go bankrupt and the whole scam began to unravel, they passed a law making it illegal to sell your shares. About an hour later, they collapsed 99.9% the moment you couldn't sell them. A more modern example would be Enron. As soon as they knew they were going down, the owners went out and sold their millions of dollars worth, and then all the workers whose annuities and retirement were all tied up in their Enron stock all got screwed when the stock became worthless. So,
because they were prohibited from selling their shares.
Because they were prohibited from selling their shares. So look for the government to start passing laws, or look for religion to really start stomping their feet and screaming at the top of their lungs for the government to pass laws mandating that you tithe, mandating that certain monies be paid to various religions in order to sustain them, mandating that it disadvantages various descriptions for non-believers.
But we've already seen some of that indirectly with the FEMA funds that are being given to churches who were hurt by the hurricane to rebuild their sanctuary.
But Judy, don't you think the textbook example here now is the voucher program?
Oh,
that
yes, absolutely.
is being advanced with every session of the legislature.
Yes.
These are just the opening salvos, my friends.
Oh, yes.
Did I mention the AOF tithing program? No, I didn't actually. Okay. But think about it.
But
I think that's what's clearly behind the whole voucher program, is to Christianize education in the country. I understand that only 18% of Republican voters have a college education. I saw that this morning on you can look that up on Meet the Press.
What's the national average?
Oh, it's something like 58% for the Democrats, and what's the national
I think
average?
it's 30-something.
Yeah.
Well, let Judy look it up. We'll
But,
find out.
the idea being to Christianize the schools, and you can kind of dumb down the country and tell everybody that we're a theocracy. And then, of course, it gives tremendous amounts of funds to CEOs that are running the business of education. Instead of spending the money on education, you're spending the money on the corporations, and they have money then to put back into the political coffers to keep the system working. The public school system has been the backbone of the success of the capitalist system in this
The
country,
fairness
and
of our
they want to get rid of
democracy.
it. Yeah.
Yes, and like you said, they're kind of doing this incrementally. With this year, the voucher for those people who are bullied.
Yeah.
Next year, it'll be vouchers for some other small group of
Disadvantaged.
That way
people.
you have a higher proportion of bullies in the public schools, so they're
Yes.
more unattractive to most students, right? They're all going to want a voucher and get into private schools. So the education budget will be diverted to churches.
Well, I think as the
education.
pain and privation increase, as they inevitably will as a result of many of these policies that we've seen enacted, the question before us is to how we're going to react. Are we going to follow our democratic traditions, and are we going to toss the rascals out, or are we simply going to cave, going to accept the official line?
As a rule, do you think that people think more clearly when they're in pain and when they're desperate than in more relaxed circumstances? In other words,
Well, it focuses the mind.
we may be seeing the convulsions before the death rattle, I hope not, of democracy as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is quite a bit of concern about that, especially with the interference in elections and news information that's being done, and the things like the targeting of people who are prone, like people who were prone to vote for Trump, were given a lot of lies that encouraged them to hate other people, other citizens. And thus reinforced their belief that immigrants were stealing their jobs and that kind of thing. And
There's a lot of nonsense out there.
Yes,
and
there
Ed,
is.
you thought we were going to run out of things to talk about.
All right.
No
We could run it
way.
another hour. In fact,
Oh, wait, the engineer just shot himself.
Okay, 40% of working-aged Americans hold a college degree.
there you go.
That was in, that doesn't say what it was.
But one thing
2014.
one thing we do have on our agenda in the future is the corruption that we're already seeing in the private school systems, in the charter schools, which of course is going to be a sign of things to come if we end up diverting these enormous public budgets into private enterprise. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. That's what's going to happen. Anyway, we're out of time for tonight. Back in 2 weeks. Hope you'll join us then for the Atheist Forum. Now, along with Judy Adkins, Jim Peterson, Tracy Thomas, and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
Prove it.
Thank you, Jim.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.